Hi, Kevin.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing all right. Um, are you ready to get this thing started?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. People should be logging in here. I noticed we had a few people in the waiting room. How do you prefer for people to make comments or have questions? Do you want to put it in the chat, raise their hand, or
I
wait
was a
till?
little, oh, sorry.
That's all right. Just tell me what your preference is.
Yeah, they can feel free to put them in the chat. They can feel free to use the raise hand function. I was
Okay.
unsure if people would be logging in from their computers or if it would be like in the main, the basement of CFH.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, they'll be logging in from their computers.
cool. So yeah, either works.
Okay, and I can unmute anybody, so it looks like we've got about 32 people so far. Those of you logging in, if you don't mind, yeah, put your name and agency in the chat so we can so everybody can see who's here. Just say hi. Vocal Kentucky's here. Coalition, Goodwill. Kim, Randy, some of our usual people are here. Arthur Street Hotel, good to have you all. St. Vincent, House of Ruth. Okay, got some people from outside of Louisville, Comprehensive Care Center of Floyd County, Kentucky. That's excellent. Bill Hollander from the Coalition Board. Some more people from the coalition. Sister Visitor, excellent, excellent. So happy you all are here today. We'll go ahead and get started then. And so thank you for signing up for this. This is really important information that we're going to cover today that impacts so many of our clients. And we're very happy that Kevin, is it Munch?
Mensch.
Sure, yeah. Want to make sure I have one of those weird last names too. So um, yeah, make sure that I get that pronounced correctly. So we're happy to have you from the ACLU Kentucky here today. And so I'm just going to turn it over to you. And if you have questions or comments, you can hit us up in the chat or raise your hand. I can unmute if needed. So let's get this thing going.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to show some materials that I put together recently and for these sorts of conversations. As you said, well, first off, can everybody see this? I hope so. Um, Great. Thank you so much, Madison. Appreciate it. And as you said, feel free to ask questions in the chat or by using the raise hand function. I'll do my best to try and respond to those real time as they come up. But I'm Kevin Minch. I'm a legal fellow with the ACLU of Kentucky. For those who aren't as familiar with us, we work on civil rights issues alongside the Coalition for the Homeless. I made this document to talk about your rights when interacting with the police. So feel free to raise your hand. Feel free to ask any questions. We want to make sure people are, as educated as they can be when they're interacting with the police. And as a basic line, this isn't legal advice. I'm not your lawyer. Just the person who's trying to offer some good information. Uh, I think a few of the big themes for this presentation are that the police are very powerful. Um, and there are times when they might violate your rights. And if they do violate your rights, lawsuits are an option, but they're uncertain, they're expensive. Sometimes they can take a long time. So the most important thing is to kind of use your intuition, use your common sense, and do what you can to keep yourself safe. If an officer is looking for a fight, you might you might be in the right, but doing the safest thing, unfortunately, might sometimes be just moving it along and kind of getting out of their way. So, basics, stay calm, don't run from cops, don't obstruct their investigations, don't give them a chance to get physical with you, all those sorts of baseline things. So starting off, sorry, there's a couple of slides up here at the top. For anybody who wants to access this document, you can go on the ACLU of Kentucky's website. It's called Know Your Rights. We have this, 20-page slide deck there, and you can feel free to download it. So going through kind of our agenda for today, we're going to talk about encounters on the street. So what happens if a cop comes up to you and says, "Hey, can I talk for a minute?" We'll talk about encounters in a vehicle, including if you live in your vehicle. We'll talk about encounters at home, including tents that, many folks live in. We'll talk about arrests, trespassing and loitering. And finally, we'll talk some little basic information for people who might be non-citizens, although immigration law is pretty complicated. So if you have a specific question, I've included the names of a number of organizations that you could turn to with more specific questions. And yes, Pony, I'll drop the URL into the chat at the end of this when I get a moment. So starting off with encounters on the street. So a cop comes up to you and says, "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" I think the big takeaway is that the only time you necessarily have to answer questions and speak to the police, the only time that you have to is during a trial in front of a judge. If someone comes up to you and just says, "Can we talk on the street?" you don't necessarily have to respond. You can feel free to just say, "No, am I free to go?" But of course, use your best judgment. If someone's trying to pick a fight with you, sometimes the best thing to do is give them your name. If they ask for your ID, give them your ID. Use your best judgment, but you don't necessarily have to respond to that. It's always a good option to say, "Am I free to go?" And if they say, "Yeah, you're free to go," or if they try to give you the runaround, "Why do you want to go? Why do you want to go?" You can just keep saying, "Am I free to go?" And if they say, "No, you're not free to go," that means you're being stopped or detained. Again, if you're being stopped, you don't have to talk. It might be good to give them your name or your ID just to kind of move things along. They might engage in a pat down, which is, a stop and frisk. I feel like a lot of people have probably heard that phrase before. When they're doing a stop and frisk, legally, they should stay on the outside of your clothes. They should be patting pockets, trying to search for a weapon, and they shouldn't go into your pockets unless they feel something that feels like it might be a weapon. In terms of how long the pat down can last, there isn't a hard and fast rule. Some will be quicker, some might be more invasive, and I'm sorry for that in advance if that ever happens to you. If you want to film it, or if this has happened to your friend, you do have the right to film stops and frisks. If an officer tries to stop you, keep yourself safe, do what's best, but you do have the right to film them. Pausing here for a moment, does anybody have any questions? Okay. Seeing no questions or no raised. Oh, Pony, I see you have a question. I'm not sure how to take you off mute, so you can ask your question.
Who is it? It's not popping up on my screen. Who's
I
has
think
either? Oh, there it
yeah.
is.
So what about the camp clearings and they have to ID themselves? Yeah, so unfortunately, if you're, and we're going to talk a little bit more about encampments and tents specifically later on in one of the later sections and what, ability the police have to search tents and things like that. But regarding just IDing yourself, treat an encampment kind of like you would just an encounter on a street. If a cop comes up and says, "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" You don't necessarily have to answer them, but if a cop has made the effort to get all the way into, the area that you're at, then I don't know if saying that is going to make them leave. They might really press you for it. So, giving them your name, if you have an ID handy, things like that, just might help move the process along and make it a little bit easier. But again, legally, you don't necessarily have to tell them your name or something. All right. If there's no further questions, and if there are, please just drop them in the chat. I'll move along to encounters in a vehicle. And sorry, part of this order, I know folks are interested in getting to encampments and things like that. Part of the order of things is just to kind of like build up some of the background. So that when we get to those thornier issues, you have a little bit of context. So thinking about vehicles, there's kind of two contexts here. If you're just driving a vehicle for transportation or if you live in a vehicle. If you're driving a vehicle and is a no camping zone a probable cause? We're going to talk a little bit about that in the trespassing and loitering section. So I'll absolutely circle back to that question. So thinking about vehicles, if you're driving your vehicle and an officer pulls you over, they can do things like ask for your driver's license, ask for registration, conduct a background check, ask other probing questions like, do you have drugs, do you have weapons, things like that. So I think the best thing here is probably stay calm, keep your hands where they can see them, don't give them an excuse to escalate the situation. If they ask you to get out of the vehicle, it's always difficult to ask, to stop this in the moment. So again, just kind of stay calm, keep your hands where they can see them. You can always say something like, I don't consent to this search. But if an officer is asking you to get out and is really escalating things, then, just do your best to stay safe. Regarding officer searches of the vehicle, it's hard to stop this from happening in the moment, but it's always good to just tell them that you don't consent, stay calm. If they damage anything, do your best to, take pictures with your cell phone, document it. Hopefully they don't get too invasive in your car. Thinking about if you live in your vehicle, because I know that's a situation for many folks. Unfortunately, vehicles that folks live in are treated the same way as vehicles that are being used for transportation, not the way that houses are treated, which are a little bit more protected. And so, it's easier for officers to, be invasive in those situations. So if you're living in your vehicle, if you're parked in a lot, officers can walk up to your window, they can knock on the window, ask what's going on. If they see something that they think is suspicious, they can ask you to get out of the vehicle, just like if you were driving on the road. They could do a search of the vehicle. And, I'm sorry, I know this is much more invasive for folks who live in their vehicles. But unfortunately, that's the way that law treats vehicles that people live in. Are there any questions? Yep. Seeing none, I'm going to move on to encounters at homes and in tents where people live as their homes. So kind of breaking these into two pieces. You can kind of the law sort of thinks as homes as there's kind of the physical four walls and a roof, so to say, made of brick and mortar homes, and then there's tents, which the law sort of treats differently. For brick and mortar, four walls and a roof situations, um, an officer can't come into your home and search it unless they have either a warrant or your consent. And you're probably not giving them your consent, so they probably need to come with a warrant. So if you're crashing on your friend's couch or something like that, and there's a knock on the door, an officer says, please open up, let us in. You can always crack the door, you can keep the chain on and crack the door just a little bit. You can yell through the door, hey, can I see your warrant? If they say they have a warrant, you can ask them to slip it under the door. You can ask them to pass it through a crack in the door. You can, nudge the window up a little bit and ask them to pass it through a crack there, of course. If they don't have a warrant and they're still asking to search, you can say, I don't consent to this search. And if they don't have a warrant and they don't have your consent, they can't search the house. So ask if they have a warrant. If they don't have it, tell them you don't consent and they shouldn't be searching the house. Of course, we know that sometimes houses still get searched without warrants and without consent. And the best thing to do is just keep yourself safe. If that's happening, it's, the cops are going beyond the law. So, keep yourself safe, document anything that's damaged, take pictures with your cell phone of, things that get damaged if anybody gets hurt, things like that. But you should always ask for a warrant and ask to see it. It'll probably have the address of the building, somebody's name, specifically what they're looking for, if there is something, things like that. The other category is tents. And the law's awful sometimes, and the law doesn't treat tents the same way as it does brick and mortar homes, unfortunately. So it kind of depends on where the tent is. If the tent is on public land, so let's say it's maybe on the side of a highway, or it's in a big open field, or behind a government building or something like that, then officers can really treat this. Unfortunately, just like any other public land, and they can go onto it without a warrant or your consent, because it's, it's just treated as public land, unfortunately. And so, if you're in a tent on the side of a highway, an officer legally can come up to you and can search the area, including if you have a lock on the outside of your tent, or if you have tarps hanging kind of as a doorway, things like that. It's really awful, but that's permissible. And I think the best thing you can do is kind of, keep yourself safe in those situations to try to move it along. Meaning, you know, get the officer to move along. If your tent is on private property, though, so let's say your friend is letting you, put a tent up in their backyard or put a tarp up or something like that, then that's treated similar to a house. So if you're on private property, you're on your friend's private property, and an officer needs a warrant or needs your consent. So if you're camping in your friend's backyard, your friend's front yard, side yard, whatever it might be, and an officer tries to come onto your friend's private property, they need the property owner's consent or a warrant. And if they don't have either of those, you're in a better place. So when it comes to camping, if you're able to get onto a friend's land or something like that, you're a little bit more protected. I know we're starting to get into some of the thornier stuff. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them. And if not, I'll get into arrests and some of those specifics. Anita, we can find this information on the ACLU of Kentucky's website, and I will just drop the link right now. Could we take Pony off mute so he could ask his question? Please.
I am trying to do that. My computer is not cooperating today.
No problem.
Yeah, when people put something in chat, it's not showing up until about a minute and a half after it's put in there. I'm not sure what's going on.
Mm-hmm. So Robin, to answer your question, it would depend on what the business is. I think that would be private. I think pretty much every business is probably private property if they own the land, versus if they're renting it. So, it would depend. I'm sure there's some places where a business is renting land in like a strip mall or something like that, and it's like public land or something. But if you know somebody who owns a restaurant or whatever, and you're camping out behind it, or somebody owns a whatever kind of store, and you're camping out in the backyard and it's private property, then I would think that would be treated similar to somebody's house. You'd be on private land. They would either need to give consent or
Okay, I think I've got
have a
Pony
warrant.
unmuted now.
Can you hear me?
Thank you so much.
And
Yeah.
John Neal is also unmuted.
John, say.
So,
Pony, I think your hand was up first.
yeah, Pony, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure this out. So we have somebody that is sitting here that wants to know, like, there's a property line. They're not for sure whose property it is, but it's private property, right? And what is the situation with this person? Do they still have to have a warrant? Is it still treated as a house? Or you can say it.
Well, okay, the property that I'm on is it's a debate. They don't know if it's one person's property or they don't know if it's the other property. So but it's private property and it's not government property. So my question is, would they have to have a warrant to come with what's going on?
Yeah. That's a terrific question. For those who maybe weren't able to hear it, the question is, somebody's camping on land and it's not government property, it's private property, but they're not exactly sure whose property it is, so they don't necessarily have permission to be there, if I'm understanding correctly. And so what I would say is, if it's private property, the police generally need to have a warrant or your consent to come onto the land and to search it. But if you're there without the consent of the property owner, then a cop could say, you're trespassing. You don't have consent of the person to be here. Just as if you were like camping in someone's backyard and, you know, you didn't have consent to be in their backyard. And so then an officer could come onto the land and say that you're trespassing. So I think the best practice in that situation is to, you know, if you think it might be two people's land, try to get permission from both of them. Or, you know, try to be in a part of the land where it's very clearly one person's. Because yeah, if there's two people and one of them says you're welcome to be here and the second person says you can't be here, and they're not really sure which part of the land then you're on, then I could definitely see a cop saying, hey man, maybe it's their land and they said you couldn't be there. You gotta beat it, or something like that. So, you know, it might be best to try and get both people's permission to be there if you can.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Jonte?
Yes, sir. Hello?
Yes, sir. I can hear you.
Okay.
Did you have a question?
No, I was just wondering, was we gonna be able to receive some of this information once we're done with the meeting?
Oh yeah.
Yes, sir.
So a recording will be posted soon, and I have put the URL for my whole presentation into the chat, and I'll drop it again once or twice more before we're done here.
Okay.
All
Cool.
trainings that the coalition offers are recorded, and within 2 to 3 business days, they get posted on our website.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate that, y'all. All right, so we're gonna get into arrests now. So getting a little bit into the nitty-gritty here. So let's say an officer asks you to stop on the street. You ask, hey, am I free to go? And they say no. Then maybe they frisk you, and then they say we're placing you under arrest for whatever reason. The top line is, you know, what do I do? Do I have to talk to this officer? Oh, sorry, before getting into that, Christine, no, we have not got into car camping yet. We'll get into that. Or we've touched on it a little bit, but I'll refresh in our next section. So let's say you've been arrested and, you know, the police say, can I talk to you for a minute? You say, hey, can I please go? And they go, nope. Maybe they pat you down. Maybe you get arrested. Do you have to talk to the police in that? And the answer is emphatically no. You do not have to talk to an officer, even if you've been arrested, until you're in a courtroom in a trial. Officers might try to give you the runaround. They might try to keep asking questions, but you do not have to talk to them if you do not want to. You can close your mouth. If you're wondering what should I say, I think the best things to say are usually, I want to remain silent. I want my lawyer. I don't want to answer questions without a lawyer. I want to remain silent. I want my lawyer. I don't want to answer questions without my lawyer. And that should hopefully shut things down as well as you can. Doesn't matter how much they badger you, even if they say, why are you being quiet? Why don't you want to talk to us? You know, why, come on, like, just make this go easier. I want to remain silent. I want my lawyer. I don't want to answer questions without my lawyer. Usually for those who are unfamiliar, when you get arrested, if it's like the middle of the day, you'll go into pre-trial at a jail. So, you know, you'll be put in like a temporary holding facility for the night. Maybe the next morning you'll go to what's called arraignment, where you go in front of a judge and the judge asks you, you know, they tell you this is what you're being charged with, guilty or not guilty. You can tell them what, you know, whatever, guilty or not guilty. And then from there, maybe the judge gives you bail and you're kind of stuck in jail until your trial, or maybe there's no bail and you could leave before your trial happens. Either way, during those times, you know, ask for a lawyer. Hopefully at arraignment, your public defender has come and, you know, spoken to you, so you can kind of tell them what the situation is before then, and you guys can strategize a little bit. At that point, you should have good access and good contact with your public defender. The people at DPA, Louisville's Public Defense Agency, are awesome. They're really, really good lawyers. So, you know, if you have access to one of them, they definitely know what they're doing. If you're treated badly during the arrest, or when you're in pre-trial, or, you know, or in that whole process, I think the best thing you can usually do is do your best to document it. If you can get a paper and pen and write some of these things down, great. if someone else who's in holding with you or was at the arrest or was a witness can write down what they saw and can sign off on it, that's terrific, even if it's on the back of a napkin or something like that. Never hurts to have those sorts of things documented. So yeah, unfortunately, people get treated bad sometimes, and the best thing to do is get it on paper, get someone else who's a witness to write down that they saw it, and get that sort of information to your public defender. Oh, I'm sorry. Are other people having trouble hearing me? Okay, I'll try and speak up and enunciate. Sorry. Looking in the chat, I'm seeing a couple of questions here. Can you expand on the difference between public and private property camping? In Kentucky, Louisville metro area, I was under the impression there is a city ordinance that forbids long-term camping even on private property. You know, maybe someone from Coalition from the Homeless could speak to this a little bit more, but I would say just to expand on the difference between private and public property, you know, public property owned by the government, private property owned by a person. One is like government buildings, the other one are like private businesses, homes, things like that. When you're on your private property, you have large discretion to do what you want to do on it. That includes camping on it. That includes letting other people camp on your property as long as it's reasonable and not creating a nuisance, or, you know, not creating something that your neighbor is going to, you know, call the cops about, like not being too loud and not being too messy, things like that. I think in terms of long-term camping, even on private property, I'm not very familiar with anything that would prohibit that. Maybe someone from Coalition from the Homeless knows. You know, if you sorry. Coalition, I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Maybe we could get somebody from the Common Assessment team or an outreach team. If they know more about that, feel free to chime in here. But that's not something that I've come across what that term long-term refers to.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, you know, if you have private property, if someone owns a farm and they're letting people put their tents up on it, that's awesome. That's a little bit more protective than being on public land. You know, if it got big, and there was like next door neighbors who were very close and maybe it was loud, or maybe people like accidentally went onto another person's land, I could see that being, you know, a place where the police might stretch the law a little bit and come on and try to break things up. But I'm not aware of any law that explicitly prohibits, or any ordinance that explicitly prohibits letting people camp on your land, as far as I know. Yeah, I see that, David. Thank you for sharing that. What David shared in the chat, that some city workers are entering onto private land to issue warnings and citations. I think this is one of those instances where it kind of depends on what the warning or the citation is for. You know, if someone came onto your camp on private land and issued a warning for, you know, maybe like a noise complaint or something, that could happen. You know, noise goes beyond the yard, and so a noise complaint, or like being messy, or throwing trash out onto the street or something like that, that could happen. Other instances of, you know, if someone comes onto private land and gives you a citation for like trespassing and you have permission to be there, then I think that's an instance where you get that to your public defender, or when you go to court, you have a pretty good case for why that shouldn't be applicable.
Yeah, David, I unmuted you. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Which outreach team are you with?
I'm with Louisville Outreach for the Unsheltered, just
Okay.
the acronym LOU for short.
Yeah.
So I think this, I know for us and for some of the folks down near my office in Portland, this has been a little cloudy. So forgive me for the phrasing of my question. It seems like there's there's great latitude for workers from the city to go onto private property in this area and to begin to warn and cite individuals. There's a church in this area that owns 2 lots close to where I'm located most of the week. And they have received their citations, $200 citations for people camping on their private property. So it just seems like there's enormous latitude, since there's no real case law yet with House Bill 5 in place, that is allowing city workers, the Office of Resiliency and Community Service largely, to go onto private land and to issue these citations based on, I imagine, complaints from neighbors, but I don't know if there's any requirement for documentation to prove where these initial complaints that are allowing them onto private land is coming from.
Mhm.
So it seems to be on site, enter land, site, warn, site, sometimes warn, site, and rinse, repeat.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
was trying to look for where I'd read about the ordinance with private property, but I know I read somewhere that Louisville has some specific city ordinances that have been in place, I think, for some time, that essentially structure is not meant for human habitation line of thinking on private property. They have the latitude to go in and cite those. I think they use it under the guise of health and safety. So forgive me if that's not a question. I think that's just one of the confusions that we're seeing at the beginning of this enforcement of House Bill 5.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think, yeah, one of the really tough things is that, you know, these city workers or police, whoever it might be, they can enter the private property insofar as they're like giving you a citation for something that they would say goes beyond the private property. So, you know, let's say there's this church with 2 lots and they let like 20 tents or whatever be on it. You know, their neighbors might say that those people are too loud, or they're like putting their trash in the street or something like that. That, you know, city workers could come onto the land to give you the citation for that. Um, and so I think it would just depend on what the citation is. If it's like a noise complaint or like a health and safety thing, like you said, then I could definitely see that happening. Um, but you know, that'd be pretty fact specific. If it was something like trespassing and like the church explicitly gave permission for the people to be there, then that would be silly. And should be a ticket that people are able to get out of. But it could be pretty specific based on what the citations are for. So but that is really interesting. If you don't mind, I'd love to follow up with you afterwards just to learn a little bit more.
Absolutely. Thank you.
For sure. Yeah, I'll drop you a line after this. Thank you. So kind of on that same topic, I wanted to talk a little bit about trespass and loitering as one of our last 2 big sections. Yes, so I'll drop this URL again, Pony. Here you go. There we go. Alrighty. Trespass and loitering. So this is a tough one, as I kind of alluded to in that last answer. You know, trespass and loitering can be dicey. If you're on public property, private property. I think the big takeaway is that, look, you might not be trespassing, you might not actually be loitering on property, but you know, when an officer is standing in front of you and they tell you to get off the land or to, you know, move it along or something like that, you know, your options are kind of move it along or, you know, take your chances. And, you know, I would just say use your best judgment in those situations. It's really fact specific and, you know, we just want people to be safe. So use your best judgment. To get a little specific with it, you know, if an officer asks you, like, what are you doing here? What are you doing on this land? You don't have to answer their question if you're very clearly on like private property where you have consent to be there, you can tell them this is my friend's land. They said I could be here. If you're on public land, they might tell you you need to get off the land. I think the big thing that's been coming up, especially around HB5, is what about sleeping on land? So I think one of the big questions is, can I sleep in a park? And legally speaking, the under HB5, the bill says you can only sleep in a park if it's been designated for camping. So maybe look around if you're near a park that you're hoping to spend the night at. Try and look for signs or something that indicate it's designated for camping. We had heard at the beginning that we didn't think the LMPD would enforce HB5 too heavily. It seems like they might be enforcing it more than we thought, or maybe that we hoped they were going to. And so it's, it's tough to say like what the actual odds are if you get in a citation, getting arrested, but use your best judgment. If you can find a park that says it has designated camping space, all the better. The next big thing is whether you can sleep in your car, like at a park or something like that. And under HB5, the bill says if you're parked lawfully on a public road or a public street or a public private parking lot, so like the lot outside a park, that you can be parked there and sleep for less than 12 hours. So if you can make that happen, I feel like that's a little bit better. And of course, just look for signs. Make sure there's not any signs that are like explicitly prohibiting, sleeping in your car or sleeping on that park. I think this is a good area for questions. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions? Okay. Oh, Pony?
Okay, yeah, never mind.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, I'm going to, oh, sorry, see a question now. What about sleeping in a car in front of a friend's/family member's house? I think this is addressed in that same provision of HB5. Where it's unlawful camping to go onto a public or a private street with the intent to sleep unless it's been designated for camping. If you're in your car, I believe it's permissible for up to 12 hours. That's the way that I read HB5, but as we said, it hasn't been interpreted that much. There haven't been that many citations issued yet, so it's tough to say. Thank you for posting that link, Belle. So yeah, Becky, I think the best advice is if you're camping in a tent or something like that, and you're gonna do it. Oh no, excuse me, your question is specifically sleeping in a car in front of a house. I think if you're doing it in a car up to 12 hours, it's probably a good place to start. Okay. Seeing no other questions right now, I'll flip to the next section, which is questions things specific to non-citizens. But if there are any more questions, please feel free to post them or raise your hand. So quickly talking about if you're a non-citizen, the big takeaway is you have the same rights as a citizen. You have the right to remain silent. You don't have to talk to an officer without a lawyer present. Once you're arrested and you're at arraignment the next morning, you should get access to a lawyer if you're arrested, the same as any other person. I think immigration law is pretty specific and it can be pretty tough sometimes. And it can depend on what your status is, if you're here on a work visa or a student visa or whatever it might be. So I think it's maybe a little bit more important to carry around an ID if that's something that can keep you safe. Would always say don't show or use false papers, things like that. That can only get you in more trouble. But if you have a really specific question pertaining to your specific immigration status, at the end of this document, I've included the contact information for probably a dozen different groups that work specifically with immigrants, and one of them could give you good specific legal advice because it is very specific to the type of immigration status that you hold. But other than that, that's really my whole presentation, y'all. Again, I'll drop the link in the chat one more time, so you can feel free to to get access to that. But I'm happy to just take this moment to hang tight and answer any questions that folks have. Raise your hand, drop it in the chat.
Now is your chance. Please take advantage of Kevin's expertise and knowledge while he's here.
And if anything does come up that's not being addressed right now, I can also drop the ACLU's email address if you have intake. If one of your civil rights has been violated, whether it's about these sorts of issue or something completely different. You can always feel free to reach out to us, and we'll do what we can to help. I'll drop our contact information in the chat.
Okay, I think John Tay raised a hand again.
I was want to know, when is our next meeting?
Next community table?
Our next meeting?
Meeting of what?
Hello?
Yeah, I'm not sure which meeting you're referring to.
No, so like after this, don't we won't have will we have any more meetings?
Oh, well, the community
Zoom?
table meetings are on Wednesdays.
Yes,
And
ma'am. Okay.
Is that what you're talking about, these community
Yes.
table trainings?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
I know what they was called. Yes, ma'am.
yeah, there's another one next week. I've sent out one invitation, but I will be sending out reminders of that.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
I was just want to make sure because I didn't want to miss none. That was all.
okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And are you at St. Vincent de Paul?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and Greer gets all of this information too. So if you ever are unsure of something, just talk to Greer.
Yes, ma'am.
I think there's a question in the chat from Macy, which was of the people who've been fined so far, have they been sleeping mostly in tents, cars, bandos? And I think Pony probably knows much more about this than I do, and he said tents. So
Okay.
yeah, and I think Pony said also in Louisville it's been the same officer, which is something we've heard. Like one person has kind of been assigned to do the HB5 enforcing, for better or worse.
Mm-hmm.
And Nicolette asked, how do we get on the list to get invited to these sorts of meetings?
Send me your email address and I'll add you to the invitation list. And I'm going to put my email address into the chat. And please, anytime you get an invitation to a community table, feel free to send that on to anybody else that you think could benefit from a training, and share the coalition's website. I popped that into the chat just a minute ago. All of our trainings, this one will be up in, I'd say Friday. If it's not up by Friday, it'll most likely be on there by Monday. And you can access this one or any previous trainings that we have as well. And then any upcoming trainings are also posted on our website.
And I see a question in the chat, Becky, about whether or not TARC stops or public space, so a person sleeping there could be fined or arrested. Yeah, TARC stops are going to be public space. That's city, like sidewalk land. So the police have a lot of latitude to go onto it and, you know, ask what you're doing if you're sleeping on it. HB5 prohibits that unless it's, you know, unless there's like a sign that says you can sleep there or something.
All right, we've got a request for your email address, Kevin.
Sure. I'll drop that in there. Yeah, I'll drop my email in there. FYI, I'll only be with the ACLU for a couple more weeks, unfortunately. So please feel free to drop me any questions. You know, and if we have if we're having conversations when I move on, I can pass you off to someone else on our team. So that's my email. Here's our general kind of email. And then if you have intake related to this or anything else, please feel free to drop that at the info@acluky.org email. And then here again is the link to our Know Your Rights materials. Feel free to print them out. You know, use them to keep yourself safe. We you know, we hope we're still figuring things out in the world of HB5, but we want to do everything we can to keep people safe. So definitely reach out with questions if you got them, and you know, keep each other safe.
Kevin, if a client wants some type of legal assistance with maybe a citation or an encounter with a police officer that they've had, where should they turn?
You know, I think if it's related to a citation or something you've been arrested for, then I think your public defender. If you've been arrested, your public defender is the best person and always the first person to go to. They know more about the specifics than we do. If you've just been cited for something, I think the best place to look is legal aid. They can give you really good specific advice about any sort of like housing issue, impact on public benefits, like anything. So I think legal aid's a great resource for those things. And I think they host like free clinics where you can just go up
Yeah.
and get a question answered. So,
Okay. All right, what other questions or comments do people have? Concerns? Or any information that you have that you think others could benefit from? Okay, well, we can go ahead and wrap this up then. And Kevin, again, we really appreciate your time. And participants, you will get a notice to complete a survey. And we ask that you please take a couple of minutes and fill that out. The coalition does take these surveys seriously. They help inform future trainings that we might need to have, evaluate how we did this time, what do we need to do differently, what do we need to keep doing. So please take a minute to fill that out and hang on to these links here for the coalition and for the ACLU so that you can get these materials and recordings and refer to them later. And you've got email addresses. So I hope you will take advantage of those. And watch your emails for upcoming trainings as well. And if you're not on my mailing list and you want to be, please send me an email. Thank you, everybody.
thank you all.
Thank you.